Arcane Act 2 dropped last Friday, and I have now watched all 3 episodes. My initial reaction is a bit underwhelmed. I want to clarify that I'm not saying Arcane Act 2 was bad. In fact, I think it was quite good, but when compared to the first act, which had a lot of great exposition, character development, world building, and then rising action, I felt like Arcane's Act 2 was a bit more muted. All of the elements that were there in Act 1 were still there in Act 2, but my biggest problem is that it felt like the story was a bit too crowded. We pick up the story in Act 2 years after the events that ended Act 1. Jinx is working for Silco, defending a shipment of the Shimmer sludge that he is bringing into the underworld, which is now officially Zaun. And this is a good entry point for us to get back into the world of Piltover and Zaun in Act 2, because we get to get reacquainted with characters we already know and see how the world has changed now that Progress Day is approaching. We get to see Powder, now fully known as Jinx, and how her mental state has been affected by the events at the end of Act 1. Although she is much more competent as a marksman, that last encounter with Violet still clearly is causing her some mental distress. We get to see a little bit more of the relationship between Jinx and Silco, how he cares for her as a pseudo-daughter, but we also get to see how Jinx's inventiveness and love of gadgetry has evolved, and how that's combined with her mental illness to kind of create this combustible personality, literally and figuratively. And this is where we kind of run into the first problem of Act 2, which is, in the beginning we're following around mainly Jinx, and because of Jinx's mental state, she's an unreliable narrator. And while unreliable narrators are incredibly complex and interesting characters to watch, they often make terrible narrators outside of a few genres like the mystery. Because we don't know if what Jinx is seeing and expressing is actually what happened, it's a bit hard to anchor ourselves to the events, and in some cases it's just downright confusing knowing what's going on. For instance, in the very first battle of Act 2, there's a scene where Jinx freezes up at the sight of a girl who is helping to raid the ship she's supposed to guard, and we think initially that it's Vi. Later it turns out that it's just a girl with red hair. So the payoff that Jinx is still very traumatized by how Vi treated her at the end really doesn't fully pay off because of the unreliable narrator factor. In addition, there's this conflict between Powder/Jinx and Savika, which we understand from Savika's side. She feels like Jinx is unreliable and is costing them opportunities because of her wild and unpredictable ways. But Jinx also really seems to have a very strong distaste for Savika. It is never really explained as to why that is, and it's unclear as to whether Jinx is fully aware of Savika's feelings or if she just is projecting her own emotions. But that's just a tiny little nitpick. Overall, I really like the direction they went with Jinx's arc in this story. Especially, I like the animation style, the glitches that seem to appear whenever she kind of has issues telling reality from her own delusions. I think that's a good clue and a good visual cue that she's the unreliable narrator. And I also like how it deals with her as this sort of mentally fragile individual on the basis of the trauma that she has endured, and doesn't just take it for jokes or take it lightly. Now, the other kind of big issue that I had with Arcane's Act 2 has to do with the story on the top side, specifically the political machinations going on with the Council of Piltover, Jace's role, and the Hextech crystals that become a point of contention among the city's elites. And to be clear, I like this portion of the story insofar as world building. It does give us a lot of great insight into the elites of Piltover, how they view the Undercity, and a good first look into the societal and political structure of Piltover. My problem with this section is that it's a little bit all over the place. Let's go through everything that happens in Act 2 in just the Piltover side of the story. Jace and Victor reveal that they have made massive leaps in the Hextech technology, allowing it to be more portable and more safe. Jinx attacks Piltover, creating a diversion so that she can break into Jace and Victor's lab, stealing some of the Hex crystals. Out of concern that the Hex crystals might be used as weapons, Jace recommends that they shut down all production and research into Hextech technology. The elites of Piltover are unwilling to do this because of the economic toll it might take. As a result, the council decides to bring Jace in as a new member of the council, allowing him to oversee and control the production of hex tech and make sure that the city of Piltover is kept safe. Jace enters into a relationship with another member of the council, who convinces/manipulates him to push his hex tech technology even further. We learn that Victor is dying of some unknown disease that potentially the hex tech technology can help cure. However, Heimerdinger is reluctant to allow Jace and Victor to continue experimenting on how hex tech could be used in this manner, and ultimately this leads to Jace leading a semi-coup to eject Heimerdinger off of the Piltover City Council. And that's not even considering the whole Caitlyn storyline with Vi, since that mainly takes place in the Undercity, as well as all of the corruption that Jace inadvertently starts to discover as he rises through the government of Piltover. To be clear, this storyline makes total sense, it flows well, and it does a great deal of world building. The problem is that all this exposition kinda gets fed to us very quickly. It would have been so much more effective if we had maybe 2 or 3 entire episodes where we could see Jace rising through the council, discovering the corruption, learning more about Victor's disease and how hex tech could help to cure him. It all just feels a bit too rushed. And that's really a shame because everything that happened down in the Zaun side of the story is really quite good. We get the first meeting and first pairing of Caitlyn and Vi, which if you don't know League of Legends, they're a pretty iconic duo. We get a fantastic fight scene between Vi and Savika, and we ultimately get that long-awaited reunion between the sisters Vi and Jinx. And I love how this reunion was kind of fraught. Jinx is still clearly going through a lot of the emotions and trauma that were caused by that last encounter between her and Vi. Meanwhile, Vi doesn't fully understand exactly the effect that her actions took on young Powder, and she hasn't really gotten to the point where she's fully actualized how her attitude has hurt others. I really also liked the relationship that they established between Jinx and Silco, how she's sort of codependent on him, but he's also taken her under his wing kind of as a surrogate daughter. It can be read one of two ways because of Jinx as the unreliable narrator. It can be read as Silco kind of taking advantage of her and maybe emotionally manipulating her, but it's also a little bit easy to understand their relationship as two broken and discarded people finding solace in each other. And I like how it was not explicitly sexual, but sort of that paternal relationship, even though it very easily could have been to really drive home that Silco is the bad guy. And I love the relationship that's being built between Vi and Caitlyn, which is something that the League of Legends community has always sort of theorized is a bit more than friends. I love that they're planting the seeds for that, even if they don't decide to take it that way. Their relationship is really one that is going to be interesting to watch. But you contrast that with what we got of the relationship between Jace and Victor and Jason Heimerdinger and Jason Mel. And that's really where that Piltover section kind of falls flat for me, because we did have the opportunity to get a lot more of those relationships, especially the Jace-Victor one, and we just didn't get quite enough. We didn't get enough of how they grew and bonded together over those years of research. And I think that's ultimately the big disappointment, is that there were so many morsels in that Piltover story that I wish we just had a little bit more time to digest. But all that being said, I thought Act 2 of Arcane was a very solid installment. I think all 3 episodes gave great animation and great voice acting performances. I liked the story direction, even if I wish that there was a little bit more time to chew on that meat.
That's what she said!
But I am excited to see how Act 3 is going to take this story, if we're going to conclude with all of the main characters being their versions from within the game, if they're going to set up a second season, if they're going to radically change the lore of the game even more than they already have. That's a topic I really hope to get into in a future episode talking about Arcane, how the lore has already been changed and what that can mean. So if you're interested in watching that, be sure to click subscribe and hit the like button so I know that that's content you guys want to see.